Tires can be really confusing. Let me show you what I mean. This is a mud tire. Kind of looks like this tire. But that wasn't the main focus of this tire's design at all. Or look at these two tires. BFG used this one as a reference to build this one, but then they changed everything. Today I want to show you ways to identify a tire's actual North Star. Like, what was it actually designed for? I asked BFG if they'd send me the entire Terrain family of tires for testing. The catch was, I told them I wanted to interview the product managers and the tire designers. Told them I do not want to talk to the marketing department. I just want to talk to the tire nerd. They actually did reply to me, a tiny little YouTuber. I know. I was as shocked as you. We asked for cross sections of their tires, their sidewall testing process. We even asked who actually created their latest compound. Turns out her name is Whitney. She's apparently very good at her job. If you always liked tires but wanted to know just a little bit more, this is the video for you.
BF Goodrich has been making tires for 153 years, taking them places nobody thought possible. They outfitted the first car to drive across the United States in 1903. They've sent their tires across the Atlantic on the Spirit of St. Louis in the first transatlantic flight, and they even sent their tires to space on the Space Shuttle Columbia. More appropriate accolades for our topic today is that Benjamin Franklin Goodrich, yes, that's the guy's actual name, Benjamin Franklin Goodrich, his tires have been on more than half of the Baja 1000 winners and atop the podium on 13 different Paris to Dakar rallies. These tires have been tested.
We're gonna talk about the construction and the tread of each of these tires, and what's gonna become really evident is that BFG has a design philosophy and a strategy, and it's a little bit different than some of their competitors. One tire, one North Star. But one little twist on that is super interesting, which leads us to our first tire that we're gonna talk about, is that the North Star on one of these tires is how do you make a tire that can be as good as possible at everything? It's a really challenging North Star. BFG invented the all-terrain tire category in 1976, and in less than a year, they had won the Baja 1000 with it. The North Star on this tire was to be a tire for everything, which was an exercise in calculated compromise. The foundation of this tire is its interlocking tread pattern. Now this is to target dry traction, which is a lot different than most road tires or all-weather tires that have longitudinal grooves in them that are made to displace water and slush. So a question I get asked a lot is why? Why would they choose this pattern as the foundation for an all-terrain tire? Did you know that in Seattle, where people say that it rains all the time, it actually only averages 150 days of rain? My point is BFG started with what we drive on the most as their foundation, and then they started the calculated compromises to try to get as good as possible at everything else. We can look at the tread on these tires, and I can show you what they've done to do that and how they've improved from the KO2 to the KO3. An interlocking tread pattern gives you a huge contact patch with whatever surface you're driving on. When you have those grooves that I was talking about on this tire, all of these grooves, you're leaving voids that aren't touching the driving surface at all constantly. So you don't have as much tire touching the road. But when you have a lot of water on the road, it can trap the water in these areas. And when it builds up enough water trapped between your grooves and you have a pad of water between you and the road, your tires are gonna spin and it's gonna lose traction. So check this out. They give you these little tiny things that go not even, this is the middle of the tire. They don't even go from the middle of the tire. They just go from here to try to channel water out of the tire. Well, if you look at the new ones, you have channels that will make it all the way from about 2/3 of the way across the tire, all the way across. So they have better water pathing. Another thing that helps when you trap water is sipes. There's sipes that you can use to channel water away from the rubber so the rubber can still contact the road. If you look at the old lugs on the KO2, like look at this one, 1, 2, 3. It only has 3 sipes. We jump to an identical type of lug on here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sipes. So this is gonna be a much better tire on wet roads. For snow traction, it's the same story with sipes. Sipes also help you in snow. We're talking about compressed snow or when it's icy out. All of these give you extra edges to catch on to the tiniest little variations in that ice on the road and in the snow, and it gives you extra grip. As far as powder, both of these tires have always been excellent. You want to catch the powder in your grooves. It's the opposite of mud traction. You actually want to hold on to the snow, because compacted snow in these cracks, the snow will stick to the other snow better than rubber sticks to snow. Okay, another evolution that is happening on this tire right now is cars keep getting heavier. With the introduction of electrical cars with really heavy batteries, they're obviously getting heavier and they're having a lot more torque. The same thing though is true of your heavy duty big trucks that like to do towing. The way that they addressed it on the new tire is you have to reinforce the lugs. So there's two things they did. They actually made these lugs bigger and then they reinforced them. What I mean by reinforce is if you look at the old KO2, these all stand alone. There's nothing really going from this lug to that lug. There's no connection points, just voids in the middle. When you look at the new one, you're gonna find out there's always these hidden super lugs on a lot of new tires to address the weight and torque of new, larger trucks. So see how this lug looks like it's solo? It's not actually. When you look down in the crack here, you find out that it is actually connected right here to right here. Same thing if you follow it up here, it's connected from here to here. So what that means is this whole lug through the middle of your tire turns out to be somewhat of a super lug where they're each reinforcing each other to strengthen each other. They did a couple other things. You'll see that these outside lugs extend farther in than these old ones did. That helps with going on and off your corners, but it also it's a bigger lug now, so it actually holds its actual shape better and it holds its form better. One thing that happens with dry traction tires is they're traditionally not very good at mud, because everything about an interlocking tread pattern that makes it amazing for driving on dry roads makes it hold on to mud in the center here and means your tread gets clogged up. It can't eject the mud, and it doesn't make it a very good mud tire. The only place that you tend on an all-terrain to be able to get good mud traction is the shoulder of your tire. Well, you're gonna notice they actually changed a bunch of things on the shoulder specifically to help in mud. One is they have these little guys. When mud packs in here, this creates air bubbles along the tire where the mud can't fully stick to the tire, and it makes it easier to toss the mud out of that void. Well, you can see like this one, they have a long one. This one, they have a short one. So it's every other one, they have a long one and a short one. When you look at the new tire, they more fully committed to this concept, and they just have long ones in every single void to help discharge mud from your shoulder. Another thing they did is they added in additional notching on the side. So you have these alternating lugs that serve as a paddle, because this one's grooved in and that one's out, and that one's in and that one's out. So those are kind of your mud paddles or scoops. But then even in the ones that bump out, they've got a notch for additional grip there. So they've done a lot on the side. They've also tried to keep these voided out pretty good here, even though the voids are smaller in the middle. On the sidewall, they did give it a more aggressive sidewall. Do you guys notice the little Easter egg they hid in here? They actually say KO3 on the tire now, on every other one. It's kind of cool. Every one of these tires has a 3-ply sidewall. There's been a lot of other companies that make all-terrain tires that have 2-ply, and that makes them possibly more comfortable on the road, and you can win in other ways, but in my opinion, it also hurts it as an actual all-terrain tire, because if you're going to actually off-road it hard, you're gonna run a high risk of puncturing your sidewalls. Normal testing of a sidewall just has a plunger that used to stab the tread again and again, and then they would do the same thing on the side. But they said, when a tire is rotating this way, just punching the side of it when it's not even moving is not an accurate test of how it will actually run into sharp objects when it's out on the road in the real world. So they actually invented this whole conveyor belt of torture items that stab and poke the tire as the tire rolls through. And because of that, they've really been able to engineer pretty amazing sidewalls. This is a KO3, and the tread actually, even in this little, that's actually a fold-up sipe right there. So that's what the siping in the actual lugs looks like, and where you can see how it goes all the way down to the bottom of the tread. You can also see your steel belts in here that keep punctures from going through the main tread. You can see your nylon that goes up here that kind of hold the shape of the tire. And then interestingly with the BF Goodrich, you have white rubber in here. Do you ever notice that however much you rub on this white paint, it never comes off? It's still white. Well, if you cut a tire in half, you're gonna find out why. All right, so this is a cross-section of a tire that has no raised white lettering at all. This is a cross-section of a BFG KO3. You notice the difference? So it turns out that they embed a special white layer of material into the actual sidewall of the tire, so as you wear down your white letters, it continues to look sharp. A bunch of people told me, hey, by the way, do you know that natural rubber is white? And yes, they are correct. Natural rubber is white. That is actually why the Michelin Man is white. This is what I meant by beefy. Putting this tire up and down on this table is kicking my butt. Okay, so this at its core is a mud tire. They did not try to mix anything. The North Star is a mud tire that's gonna be great at rock crawling and off-road and be able to handle all the crazy stuff. I got to ask them a bunch of questions that I've always had about the design of this tire that I never knew the answer to that were super fascinating. So I'm gonna share some of those with you really quick, but first, just when we look at the tread, one way that you know this is a mud tire is first of all, it doesn't have the interlocking pattern like the other one that tends to trap mud in here at all. This tire has 100%, it has straight lines all the way across it. Nothing's interlocking on any of this. It creates all these X patterns where it can crash and fold around rocks. When it's running over rocks, it just will flatten out and fold over top of them and increase your traction patch. So one of the questions that I always had for them that does relate to the tread actually was, why is this rounded? Why do they round off the edge so much? I actually love this tire. On one of my rock crawlers, I use this tire specifically because the rounded edge makes it tuck and fit better on my truck. But I had a feeling that was not the reason that they actually decided to go this way, and it wasn't. The way that this tire has such a crushable pattern where it will just fold and spread out flat and create a really, really big contact patch, well, what that's done is it makes it to where when you air this tire down, it will actually flatten out and get really, really wide. And when it does that, it's actually just as wide as any of those competitors that have the squared off sides. So what they said is we can create, by not having that interlocking tread pattern, by having a crushable tread that will flatten out and create a really big footprint, we can give you more traction when you're off-road, but then when you're aired up and you're driving, this not being squared off allows you to transition from the side of the tire, the shoulder, over to the middle of the tire better, which means this is a lot easier tire to steer. While we're talking about the shoulder, let's also cover the sidewalls really quick. And we're gonna hop over here for this. This is the KO3 right here. And remember how we were talking about it kind of has legendarily strong sidewalls? That's really your thinnest point of your sidewall right here. When you measure this, it is 10 millimeters, just using this guy. This is the KM3. And now you can see why I call it beef, like just a beefy tire. When you measure this at its thinnest point, right above that notch, this one is 15 millimeters. So the KM3 actually has a 50% thicker sidewall than the KO3, and the KO3 is already famous for having strong sidewalls. So I asked them, why in the world did you go that crazy on the sidewall? What they told me is they said that they wanted what they call a zero walkout failure sidewall, meaning that just the sidewall failing and getting ripped should never be the reason that you have to walk out of a trail. They said, sure, we've had guys that race these things down in Baja and blow up and crash their cars and completely destroy their rim, and a tire gets torn up in the process. And they said, that's acceptable. But they don't want just a rip in the sidewall to be the cause of you having to walk off a trail. So that is why they decide to go so thick on the sidewall. This is where another super interesting question that I had for them came up. I wanted to know more about the compound, the mix of material that they use to make their rubber and what choices they've made to do that. Well, compound rubber is like each tire company's special secret sauce. They don't share recipes with each other. So they don't really like to talk about this, but I was able to get a couple things out of them. The obvious thing that they said was this tire has a softer compound than their other tires, which totally makes sense. It's also why it won't get as many miles in its life if you're driving it on the road, because it's softer, but it's made to be softer to be able to stick to the rock and stick in the mud and everything better. We all kind of know that. That's how all mud tires are. What I didn't know is that they actually have a way when they mix and make their rubber. There's a process that rubber goes through called vulcanizing. There's a whole bunch of stuff that they do to rubber to change the molecular structure of the rubber. Well, a lot of that was for durability. So like the sun UV rays wouldn't just rot it out. That's why they add carbon black. That's why these are black instead of white. They do a lot to rubber to make it stronger. But what I didn't know they were able to do is they're able to manipulate the molecular structure to impact the direction that a tire tears. I thought this was super interesting. Like when you start a rip in a sheet, you can just rip it the rest of the way down super easy. Well, with tire rubber, they change the molecular structure of the rubber so that when it gets stabbed and a rip starts, that rip is supposed to go back toward the surface. It's not supposed to go deeper into the tire. That's pretty nerdy stuff. Remember how I said that BF Goodrich likes to have a single North Star for a tire? Well, that's probably not more true than in any tire than the HD Terrain tire. This tire has a super fascinating story on how it came to be that's going to pretty much tell you everything you need to know about this tire. So, when BFG was doing research to build a new tire, they realized that a bunch of fleet companies, we're talking companies with thousands of trucks. Think of like mining companies up in Alaska or like oil companies, okay? We're buying tons and tons of KM3 mud tires, which doesn't make a lot of sense because the KM3, first of all, is not made for full-size, super heavy trucks to be driving tons and tons of miles. It is a short mileage, soft rubber, everything off-road, everything rock crawling tire, right? So they said, why are you guys buying the KM3? It doesn't make any sense. And what they found out is that in some of these companies, they would get fined if they would get stuck, like in the mud. And it was, boys will be boys, they fool around, they go in the mud, they get stuck. So people were obsessed with not ever getting stuck. And they would get these KM3s because they're great in mud. We all know they're good in mud. But the problem is, in the oil fields, there are so many famous trucks, like the 1 million mile Tundra. That's from the oil fields. These things are putting on tons and tons of miles. And then not only that, they're putting tons and tons of miles in gravel roads that just eat tires. So if you have a soft rubber tire on gravel roads all the time, this is not a good idea. So BFG decided to give them an alternative tire, and that's the HD Terrain. This thing, just like it sounds like, this is made for heavy duty trucks. It is made for your F250s, your F350s, your F550s. This thing is made to handle incredibly heavy loads. Ironically, we actually have this tire on our Troopy, and that's a little deceiving because you think, it's just a Toyota car, it's not a big deal, right? But the Troopy is actually made for holding 11 people, and it has one of the biggest payloads of anything that I have. In fact, it has a much bigger payload than my Ford F250 does. So it's actually not that bad of a tire for it. But the HD Terrain, essentially what they did is they wanted to give you good traction still in the mud so these guys aren't getting stuck and getting fined. But the more important thing is they needed to give them a harder rubber, but it would still need to work in freezing temperatures and bad weather. Okay, so what we have here is a tire that can handle all the towing, all the heavy loads, tons and tons of miles, but can still handle all the mud and all the muck of the mining and oil fields. If you happen to be a person that's running a really heavy truck and towing a lot, and you work on a lot of really, really crazy job sites that are hard to get into and out of, this is probably the tire for you. And I feel like a lot of people don't even know that this tire exists. The BFG Trail Train is another tire that came from basically just listening to your customer. What BFG started to notice was that there was a gap in their lineup of tires. There was people that were driving 98% of the time on road. But then, you know, your classic weekend warrior, they want to be able to get out and go camping. A lot of these people were driving lighter vehicles like a Subaru or a small SUV or a crossover. And they wanted to go camping. They wanted to get on these dirt roads and go on an adventure. But the only choice was either going back to a normal road tire, where you run a big risk of getting punctures and things like that, and the traction isn't so good, or you jump from there all the way to like a KO3 that is, you know, winning the Baja 1000 and definitely made to be off-road and aggressive. So they figured that they could meet a need that was somewhere in the middle. These are the people that care a lot about road noise, for example. They wanted quiet tires. They wanted tires that steer really, really nice. They wanted tires that drive nice on the road because for the most part, they're commuting and that's their everyday life. So the trail terrain was where they decided to marry a road tire and the KO3 and come up with something in the middle. This thing needs to be quiet. In fact, they actually built a whole tire that passed all the traction tests and everything, and then it failed on road noise. So then they went back to the drawing board and they started over again. And this is what they came up with. And you're gonna notice right away that it has some differences. You're gonna notice the side, obviously this is made mostly for road. So it doesn't have the big bars that go all the way across for mud. It has one solid panel on the side, at least as solid as possible, and that helps with your steering and everything like that. It helps it get really good road performance. But you notice they did put in enough grooves here and enough lips that stick out here. That's to help you out still, just for those few times that you do go off-road, to make sure that you can actually get home. So it's a wonderful tire for your average camper, your average person that's a weekend warrior, that is not doing hardcore off-road, but needed something more aggressive for the few times that they are getting out there and they're doing some exploring.
If you're new here, my name's Nathan Mueller. Welcome to Outdoor Auto. The goal of this channel is just to be a resource for people that want to get into off-roading and explore the outdoors.